Hi, I'm Raphael, and this is my portal.
Hi guys, we are joined today by Raphael. We will be discussing all things spirit, the way that portals are formed within his practice, and anything else that is esoteric and spiritual that is going on within his work. So, hi Raphael, it's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So, define your practice in one sentence.
Um, Research, writing, the collecting of things, specifically books, maybe. As you can see.
A
um,
collector of things is what we're
yeah,
going with.
definitely.
Perfect. So let's start talking a little bit about how spirit influences your work. Is it separate or is it like an all together experience?
I would say spirit influences my work quite heavily, to be honest. I think especially like after my grandmother passed away, like I always saw the spirit in art as something quite important anyway when I was reading stuff like Mark Fisher, when he used to talk about the idea of like energy from something in the past that is now attached to an object in the future. Um, and I didn't really understand that until she passed away, because then all the objects I owned that belonged to her or were given to me by her suddenly had this new meaning, and they were suddenly were almost more tangible than they were before, which is strange because they are physical objects, but you almost want to touch them more, feel them more, engage with them more. And in a way, the spirit influences my work very much because I believe that the spirit is within the objects that I'm making, or when I'm writing, I believe that there's like an energy that's being created that we necessarily don't see. Um, and whether or not it's like for her or it's for me and it's compensating for lack of her, um, I don't know. But it does all come down to the word spirit, I guess.
So would you say you're almost curating a collection of entity now with this in mind in some way? And if so, does the entity speak or does it just exist through the stories that you are aware of, if that makes sense? How does the audience experience entity within the work?
I would say it depends how we define speak, because in a way, yes, I think that the object does speak, but whether or not it speaks out loud is another question. I would say that um, entity is infused within the object. What I'm trying to question through my work is whether the object already has that energy or if it is given it like post creation.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like the entity was never there before, unless, of course, we are the entity. But then when you lose someone, you're almost given like a justifiable entity to create work from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do wonder if she was still alive, if the objects would have that energy and if she'd be attached and still. I don't think they would, to be honest.
Is there um is there something in being sentimental that always carries through your work in some way, would you say? That everything that you create serves a purpose and you don't want to release it? Like, are these pieces of work something that you will hold very dear to yourself as opposed to
Mhm.
giving away in some way?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny you said that because I actually I actually gave away a piece to a friend who was in hospital, and they asked me to send them a piece. So I sort of wrapped it up and sent it abroad. And it did feel really strange doing that. Like I'm almost transporting her away, I'm transporting the object away that I've like put this energy into, and then it's like going elsewhere. Um, and yeah, it felt odd because I feel like I have grown a slight attachment to them.
Right.
Um, yeah, but also in a way, sorry, could you repeat the last bit of the question?
Yeah. So is there, I would say, is there a resistance to wanting to release the items? Is it integral to your practice that you keep them close to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But after sending it, I kind of changed my mind. Maybe sharing it is part of the point. And that's what's led me to sentimentality and intimacy and how the two interconnect. Um, because in the most part, in my studio when I was working, I was figuring out how to create something that explores sentimentality, but is also inclusive. And then I realized that it really all leads to intimacy.
Right.
Um, and yeah, through like loads of mind mapping, like I usually have like really large rolls of paper that I stick to the walls. Um, and I sort of write on it and I add photos and I then connect everything with red tape and I try and figure out where everything leads to. And in the end, it really all boils down to intimacy and how people interact with an object during the day. And in a way, that's like intimacy with yourself, which I don't think many people really think about. And I feel like people always think of intimacy as like a shared thing, which is like
Right.
something you do in the bedroom with your person, right?
Raphael.
Right? Like I don't know.
Me.
Um, yeah, so, like,
I'm joking.
um, and yet now I see intimacy as something you share with yourself, with the objects around you. Like when you have like your favorite cup or mug that you've bought and you use that to drink your coffee out of every day, or you have like a specific bed linen you like to use, or you have a specific type of pen you like to use, and then you use it. These are all things that are intimate.
So do you feel as though you're
Um,
infusing the items with spirit in some way through your usage of them? That is,
I think we always are. I think like no matter what we're doing, we're always using energy because obviously energy can't be destroyed, only transferred. So even like just me like putting these glasses on, I feel is like an intimate action. And it's also like part of a bigger ritual
yeah.
in the grand scheme of the day. And I do feel that like post lockdown and post COVID, people have probably, and I don't think COVID's over, obviously it's not for many places. Um, I think hopefully once we get to that point in the future, people will have adopted lots of different rituals.
Yeah.
During that time, they had to stay inside or indoors. Um, because at the end of the day, if you think about an animal like hibernating, they spend all of their time like inside a buried hole, right? That they've like made that belongs to them and it's messy. And I feel like human beings, when they go home, they get to do that and be that animal. Um,
Have we returned to a primal state in lockdown per se? Would you, do you feel?
yes and no. I
Okay.
think commercially, no, because people have been at home and therefore there's an opportunity for people to buy online. And therefore the use of technology has, I think, advanced even further actually during lockdown. I feel like people have relied on it more to get what they want out of wherever they live, as opposed to local shops and local businesses. Um, I would say people have returned to a primal nature because they don't want to do the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday anymore. Um, but I guess like my artwork explores less of that and more of the small actions, the everyday actions that you think are chores or you think are quick and non-sequential, but actually they are very intimate, and very loving because you're doing it to please yourself.
Yeah.
Um, you if you do something you want to do, it's to make yourself happy at the end of the day. So it has to be intimate because if you were doing it for someone else and you're doing something to please them, that would be your way of sharing intimacy with them.
And one thing I wanted to pick up on there is like the use of the word ritual in the context of the everyday or the
Yeah.
potentially mundane. I suppose when we think about spiritualism and ritual, we often think about calling upon higher entities, higher forces. So, what happens when we make a ritual so far removed from spirituality? Like, how is the everyday sacred? How is getting on your typewriter and typing sacred in essence to you?
Well, I think it's again like about what's attached to the object. Um, like if a mug is made by a specific person and you use that every day, you're attached to this person. Like, for example, I have this like amazing cup that I use every day. And it's made by a woman called Talia. But I only have one of them. And she completely handmade it herself using volcanic clay. So it does feel very special to hold it, and also knowing that another human being spent hours making this, like, there's a lot of energy physically, but also like energy we can't see that has gone into this. And yeah, that's like a person sharing something with me. And then like this typewriter belonged to my mother's uncle. So it's like very old.
Right.
Again, like there's an attachment to him and to my mother. And I do feel like people play a big part in my work, and like how connections are made through people and object. There's actually this basically like where I come from. So like my mother is partially from Portugal, and in Portugal the origin of the word fetish is fetisho. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but it basically means when someone gives supernatural power to an object. And I very much feel like we subconsciously do that in everyday life.
So I was just gonna jump on that thought there. When you say we give supernatural kind of what would you say, aspects or kind of energies to the items you're using, as you type on that typewriter, do you almost feel informed by the person that used it before? Like, do you feel their energy informing what it is that you're writing? So it's not entirely of your own agency?
That's actually a really interesting question. Because I wouldn't say I think of like my mother's uncle when I'm using it, but I am subconsciously aware that it was his. I would say I wasn't close to him. So again, it's like this idea of like how well you know a person. And that's kind of what I'm trying to question and understand in my performance work, is how do I get the viewers and the participants in a gallery space, or any space, it doesn't have to be a gallery space, to interact, understand, and feel what I'm feeling,
Yeah.
or how do I allow them to feel what they need to feel from that experience without it like completely altering the nature of the work. Because obviously like not everyone viewing or participating in the work has lost someone in the last year, or has lost like a grandparent or a
Right.
parent, anyone. Someone may not have experienced death in their life yet, in the fruition of this artwork. And so it's unfair for me to expect them to feel the same way, but it's also a challenge, and an exciting challenge for me to try and make them feel that.
So how would you say, I mean, speculatively, that you could do that in a way? Like, is there something that you think would trigger this kind of collective recognition of spirit in the space? Like a
Yeah, I
technique
think it's going to
or
begin. Yeah, I think it's going to begin with the objects actually, like the objects I've been making. I feel like if I can share those in a space with other people and they can interact with them, like I'm interacting with this like cut by Talia, and perhaps like they can feel something tangible rather than an artwork that's sort of ethereal or something they can't touch, see. you know, if it's an object that's tangible, they can smell it, they can hold it.
So
It's very,
it's about is it about bringing the spirit, like the intangible, into something that we can feel? So like if I'm holding this object, is that my experience of spirit in that
yeah,
sense? Like
it's kind of like creating a vessel for the energy, right?
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think with that, it's very
Yeah,
interesting that your vases or your vases look very bodily in some way. Like they almost look like organs and hearts in some way, and yet they're obviously made from like different clays. But there's something very innately human about these items. So you
yeah,
and I think the way they're kind of created and the shapes of them and the angles, they do invite you to kind of caress them in a very human and intimate way. Like, should you be able to? So, is it important that they actually touch the items, or is it just in seeing that it exists that's important?
um I do oddly think it's important that they touch the objects.
Mhm.
um I feel like touch is not something that's done a lot in a sort of art setting.
Yeah,
I feel like there's always like a red line or a security line that says
that
do
I
not.
always cross.
There's always a security guard. And I feel like that almost like hinders the experience of the work, right?
Right.
Um, like I remember seeing the Franz West show at Tate and being quite pissed off. Because obviously Franz West, like his pieces are seating rugs, like
Yeah,
things you can sit on and interact with. And I
tangible.
think they had this like, yeah, and they had this like one piece where they had made fake false versions of his work for you to pick up and touch. And I was really annoyed by this because like obviously I understand because of the value of the items that you
Yeah,
couldn't actually touch them. Um, but I think I was upset because a lot of his work does feel quite tangible and
right.
colorful and have texture. And I often feel like it's going back that like very typical phrase of a kid in a candy shop, right? Like you do want to touch it, but you can't. And
Yeah,
um, I sometimes feel like in my head, I want to try and have work that people can touch because then I'm not trying to like give the work a commercial value because that's not what it's about. If it gets damaged, it gets damaged. And that's like another question,
Mhm.
right? Like I can't be angry if they've damaged it and then be like, well, you've messed up the retail value of the work.
Yeah. So
It's so silly.
spirit has no retail value, you might say.
Exactly. I don't want that to be part of the work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So, having said that, it's interesting to think about where you might want to place this work or where does the work exist, because I suppose if you invite people to touch, that rules out the very conventional kind of white cube gallery sterile space. So, being that it is of sentimental value, did you ever consider that the work needs to be placed where an experience was had in some way, or that the gallery might exist in your domestic space as opposed to a conventional one?
Um, yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel like a domestic space is where the work originates from, because
Right.
obviously, we're talking about intimacy and our everyday actions at home. Um, and obviously the objects around me are objects that belong to um her. I keep calling my grandmother her like she's like this otherworldly being. um yeah, I in a way, I guess it's it's all rooted in the fact that she obviously like well, maybe haven't explained this yet, but she used to do a cabana
Yeah.
and make a cabana pots. So I started making my own pots, um, inspired by that, and we're calling them vases or vases. Um, and that's like the energy I'm putting into it is like something she used to do. So it's very much like enforcing a repeated action. But each time the result is different.
Right.
So in a way, like I kind of want to share that in a domestic space because it originates there, and it also originates from a practice.
Right.
And I do feel like doing that in a gallery setting might, I don't know, that's
I think sometimes we ask questions that we haven't completely worked through,
yeah.
allows us to, but it sounds as though with everything being so intimate and personal, that that could be somewhere where your work is headed, or where it might end up residing, you know, as there is so much pressure on us to show in a white cube gallery and whatever. Sometimes we have to realize as creators, maybe that's not where it best belongs. And
Well, I also feel like for spatial reasons, it would be difficult to show work like that in a domestic setting, only because of the space you'd need for participants to interact with artworks, especially if you're moving around in a space. And I do feel like, you know, if you go back to, for example, like Hans Ulrich, his first ever show, he actually did it in his kitchen when he was 23. And I guess in a way that's quite clever, because it was about domestic spaces, except this, although it's under in a domestic setting, perhaps also needs to be separated from that so that you can see it as a work as opposed to an intimate ritual with yourself.
Right, yeah. And I think
because it stems from that, but maybe it has to be separate, maybe it has to be individualized, maybe you have to see it as something otherworldly rather than so casual. I don't know.
yeah. No, I know what you mean. I think it's really interesting because I was feeling to segue into something like the polar opposite of within your house and take us all the way into this piece, A is A. Where does this piece belong, or where is this piece installed in the world?
Oh, I see. You're talking about the piece behind you. Yeah. So so it was a collaboration with 8 other artists where we were exploring the distances and time zones that we were in. So I can't remember exactly what everyone's time zones were, but there was like +8 hours, -5, +5. So like very different time zones. And I guess the piece was about sharing that space internationally, but also presenting our own portals. So one designer, one of the artists, who's also a designer, he created these rooms virtually that you could enter through a website, and each corridor led down to a different person's room and their idea of a world they've created or a room setting.
Yeah.
So one artist's room was like a horse with no legs in like an ethereal forest that was very dark and grey. My piece was actually sort of based around the idea of archiving items belonging to someone. So there was like clothing hung very flat along the walls and sort of a dusty pink floor. So it was this idea of like a museum or library archive, and you're looking at pieces that can't be touched, which is quite strange as I'm talking about people can't work, but then I'm like making stuff that people can't touch.
It's interesting how you've kind of segued between the two. I think potentially lockdown has made you redefine how you want to exhibit in that sense, where we were so wired to be so, I suppose, sterile in some way, and in our understanding of art and how we exhibit as artists, it's very much don't touch this. I'm an artist. In some way, like it's so high that you can't touch it. There's this kind of inaccessibility to the work, so potentially we are unlearning now in this time. I think what might be what I find so interesting about this work is this in Mexico, by the way? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so this photo was taken by an artist called Arlette Del Hoyo, and I sent her a poem which she translated in Spanish. And the poem is about my family losing our house when I was about 12. and sort of my family's financial situation dramatically changing. And so she decided to translate the poem into Spanish. And we discussed that changing it into Spanish changes it in a way, it almost makes it more poetic, especially for those that don't understand what it says. And she stuck it in various places in the market in Mexico, for people to read,
I think
which I
that's
think is
super.
also strange because obviously these are people that have never met me and therefore have no idea who I am or what I look like or what my story is. And so reading it must be quite strange for them. And they're probably wondering who I am.
And there's like, but the thing is, there's this unspoken intimacy to that. Like, whether they don't know you, you don't know someone through that market could really deeply resonate with what is written and what your story is. And
Yeah.
I suppose potentially, if we're thinking about energy being attached to objects, it would be interesting to know how you felt once you had that paper back from Mexico to you back home. I think it would be super interesting if our letter were to send it to you, and then you would see how you feel after it had been in that space or after it had existed with so many people experiencing it, since
Yeah,
that
that's,
energy is attached to the objects.
yeah, I completely agree with that. It's so interesting because you have no, I mean, if you think about a marketplace where there's loads of food, like think about how many people realistically, like in
Have,
like a day even have seen that and touched it or
it's
read it.
true.
Um, yeah, and all the chickens that have read it, like there are pictures of chickens reading it, and I was like,
I can relate.
oh.
I love that.
Like great, I'm so glad I like passed on my energy to a few chickens. Yeah, I I feel like that would be strange to like unravel the parcel and arrive and like open it and feel like this. I don't know.
Vortex or
Like,
like portal of.
yeah, portal of Mexico. I don't know. Like,
How amazing. You need to do that. Just
yeah, I should do that. That's like that. That's like that piece by the artist. Then he did that piece like the air of Paris, right? Where he like got the air from Paris and kept it in a bottle.
that is pretty cool, to be fair. I think this though, it would be interesting to see if somebody had walked away with your sentiments in some way. Like, should
He had
some,
like taken it.
what if somebody took your experience physically?
Mm,
How would you feel about that if
yeah.
somebody had chosen to take down the poster and take it back to their house or take it elsewhere? Like,
Like,
what
what
would
if
that
someone has that like stuck to their wall in their bedroom?
they look at it every night before they go to sleep? And like, oh, Raphael.
Or yeah, or like, if, what if they like have gone through a similar experience
You never know,
and
Raph.
they're reading it and they feel very sentimental about the experience too? Like that's great. Like again, I don't expect people to go through the exact same experiences, but if
Hmm.
someone did
So the
and they
more,
read,
no, I
I
was
want,
going to say, the more we talk about this, Raph, the more I am hearing like portal to intimacy. I mean, the
mm,
spirit of intimacy, I think, is what's coming through quite loudly here, and how
yeah,
we connect with that, and how potentially that the people that have passed are the ones that teach us intimacy, because in telling a story is a very intimate thing. And I think in many cases we choose to tell the stories of those that are past, and that's what happens in folklore, that our forefathers and the people before us and their stories are told, but essentially we're telling the story of spirit in some sense, if that makes
yeah,
sense. And that's how we're creating a sense of intimacy. Like the people like back when that would gather around the fire to hear the stories, that is super intimate, right? And they seldom tell stories about the people that are still here, right? It's always your grandfather and your ancestor and your forefather, if you know what I mean. So spirit is creating a portal of intimacy, which I find quite interesting, that it feels as though your work's doing something quite similar to me.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Like I feel like it is a portal through to intimacy. Like this idea that like, you're constantly exploring how to be more intimate and more intimate.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how to be intimate, like more so with yourself, but also with complete strangers that
Right.
aren't your family, and how they can understand who you are, where you come from, like
Right.
culturally, but also like now, how the culture around you has influenced you as a person now.
Mm-hmm.
Why and how you've become the person you have,
Right.
and how you share that, and how you would adapt that in your everyday life, how you live. Um, like, you know, what you keep in your bag with you every day.
Right.
Like, for me, I always keep like a few zines, a magazine, a book, always things to read. I always have my laptop. Um, I always have two different sets of glasses. It's like, you know, one pair that are normal and optical and one pair that are sunglasses. It's like
Right.
these are all things that we do and prepare for. And that, again, it's a ritual, like essentially.
But not
And
only that, I think
like when people think of the word ritual, I feel like people imagine like 10 people dressed in black sitting around in a circle with fire, right?
I was literally going to say, like, using the word ritual in this
Yeah.
sense in itself is a different kind of way to experience it. In a sense, is a little bit subversive to religion, if you know what I mean, because we're taking that word and we're taking it somewhere completely different. And in
Yeah.
a sense, it used to be something so exclusive that we're making very inclusive now by changing the way we say it and how, I suppose, casually we can make something one, if you know what I mean. So, I think what's interesting also about you, I mean, knowing you so personally also outside of this, is I feel as though a lot of your
Yeah.
rituals, a lot of the things that you do are informed by what your grandmother would have done, what your grandfather would have worn, how the stories of how your grandfather would eat a grapefruit for breakfast every single day. And so you would pick one up too, you know?
Yeah. It's so because also we do know each other so personally, and like we have lived together. So like you know
The ins
what
and
my
outs.
rituals are and like what I do, how I dress, what I eat, like um and yeah, I would say my grandparents greatly influenced me. I have great respect for them, both of them, and they always have influenced me. I feel like people often find it very strange that everything I do bounces off from them.
That's it.
But
I've seen that too. I've seen your elders inform your domestic way of life from the way you get out of the bed, from the way you tuck your bed sheets, how Susan would have done, or how your grandma would have done, or
exactly.
somebody in your life would have done.
Yeah, or like even like what time I get up in the morning is influenced by what time like my grandmother would have got up, you know? Like even the fact that she ate granola blueberries, blah, 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 and I eat granola with blueberries.
That's what I mean. It's like it's interesting how these are almost like set in stone ritualistic things, like down to how you eat, down to how you even get
Yeah.
ready in the morning. And there are, I would say, you go as far as to almost have customs in that, thou shalt not leave the house without this, like thou
I
shalt.
like the Ten Commandments. Like thou shalt not leave the house without eating granola and blueberries. Thou shalt wake up at 6:30. Like, um, uh, honestly, like it might be strange and like very rhythmic, and repetitive, monotonous. You know, there are so many words to describe this, but like in a way, like that's who I am. Like very systematic, and that translates into my artwork a lot. Hence why I make like the pots. And then like I write, and there's like a rhythm to it, and each thing is influencing the next. And then
That,
like I'll write like a diary entry, for example, on my typewriter every 2 days, um, about like how I'm feeling about intimacy and like the work I'm making and what the next step is. Um, and there are like loads of questions I'm asking myself, like, am I going to use costumes in my performances? Will this deter from the, the personal nature of it and make it too dressy and dramatic and theatre based? And I feel like that goes back to like my grandmother and how she used to get dressed and like always curl her hair, and again, it's like always back to like those influences.
I think that's what's so interesting. It's like no matter what you do, it feels as though when you're working with your family's energy, there will always be an element of theatre. There will always be a consideration of fashion because Yvonne, Raphael's grandmother, your grandmother, was incredibly expressive in that way, like incredibly
Yeah.
informed, I would say, in terms of fashion, and she had many a tell, but
Yeah.
it's maybe we'll leave that for now.
I'll leave that. Yeah, I will say that there aren't many wardrobes that will rival hers for sure.
100%. We will say that. But we love Yvonne. Anyway, with that said, it's as though to be authentic and to express her spirit, it would be somewhat of a betrayal or somewhat inauthentic to make it not fashionable. I think if we're thinking about fashion as this, I don't know, superficial thing, within these parameters, it's not. If that makes sense. So within these parameters, this is how you seem to channel her spirit. And I think going forward into that, we might want to talk about movement in the work in terms of, I suppose, performance. And I think what I'm thinking of initially is that Joan Jonas, where she was holding, or her performers rather were holding all the mirrors. And it
Oh
was
yeah,
very,
yeah, 1969. Yeah.
I think that that's making me think of your work in this kind of almost fleeting way. Like you're seeing something that is so spectacular in some way, but you're only catching it at certain angles and it's very elusive. And I think
Mhm.
that is very relative to the way that your grandmother lived her life in
Well,
some way.
Joanne Jonas is very much quite theatrical, right? Like she always has a prop or like an owl mask, I think I remember.
Yeah.
Like a lot of I actually, the first time I saw her piece, I took my younger sister to go see her show. And like it was the first time she'd like been to an art gallery to see a show. So she was very like confused. Perhaps I should like introduce her to pieces that are more like expected when you like sort of think about it and like a kid learning about art, like you take them to see like a Mark Rothko piece or something, right?
Here
Or
is
I don't know.
Duchamp's toilet.
Yeah, like here's Martha Duchamp's toilet, or like this is Andy Warhol. Okay, this is a Brillo box. But no, I took her to see Joanne Jonas. She was like, okay, so this is art. And yeah, that piece is really all about like subverting the audience's view. So at like no point does the audience have like a perfect sense of what's happening and where things are happening,
And
because
is
each
that
mirror is
not what I was going to say, is that not the essence of spirit in some way? Like it comes, it shows you something spectacular, and then it maneuvers itself. So you're like, have I just seen that?
at first. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting to see how you are going to bring movement with these objects into your practice. And
Yeah. It's very much, because obviously that like as we discussed before, like that I was at like Rambert for 2 years and I was dancing and like I took dancing quite seriously.
but Rumba is a performing arts or dance school, just so everyone knows.
Yeah. And like obviously I loved dancing, and then I got into fashion, and then I got into art, and like now my kind of in my head I'm trying to figure out how to like combine fashion and art together.
Right.
But there's always this thought of movement in my head because
Yeah.
of that dance training. Because I'm always thinking about like choreography and steps and pieces that
And
involve that. And I'm always thinking about larger spaces because also I've danced in halls. So in my head, when I think of like an art piece or performance, I'm thinking of a stage or like a dance practice hall,
And I wanted to ask you to that effect, is that because of how you perceive spirit to move? Like, does spirit need to not be inhibited in a small space? Like, does spirit need a large space to move? Like, what is the requirement of spirit in your?
Well, spirit is everywhere. Spirit encompasses and engulfs the world. So I think it does need a large space because the world, the earth is a large space.
Right.
If I could have dancers in every continent dancing at the same time, I think that would greatly describe spirit.
That's a dream, Raph.
But yeah, I definitely feel like you need large space. Maybe not if you're one person, but I feel like when you go to, for example, like a spiritual dance class in London, let's say you're going to ecstatic shamanic dance class, you have like 50 people in one room dancing for 5 hours and chanting. And I suppose in a way it's nice to have close proximity to those people because you're dancing in a space and you're holding hands. Whereas maybe if it was a performance only for like aesthetic reasons, perhaps not for like reasons that surround the exact motive of the work, it'd be better to have a larger space so dancers have like more freedom to move around with objects.
Right. And I think in terms of movement, not just thinking about dance, but also thinking about the way you run your Instagram story every single day without fail at Rafael Del Bono, get at it.
Yeah.
A little shameless plug there. But essentially, what we see is like so much quick stimulus, like all the time. Like there's images, there's videos, there's everything just happening so quickly that it's almost a movement or a dance in itself to catch that information, you know, and you almost have to take a step back, take a step forward, and that's very animated
Yeah.
in a sense
Yeah.
through your digital portal. So I mean, movement happens in so many ways, I guess, through your work. I think to that effect, I want to talk to you a little bit now about if you were to create a portal, how would yours be? Like in this space, how should we experience your portal?
I would want my portals to be very intimate. So in a sense, I'd want my portals to be very domestic, not like an entire house, but perhaps like a domestic room. Or it could be quite simple, to be honest. But I think it should have the components and elements it needs for you to create your own ritual.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I think it should have like, you know, a station for writing, a station for making tea. But then in another sense, like a portal should really be like a blank slate. And that's quite a boring answer, but I do feel like a portal should be like a white room with perfect plush carpeting. And then for other people to imbue their own style into that portal. Like, for example, a portal to another place, it's blank, but once you get there, once you're in the portal, it's filled with those things, you know, that you're taking with you. So I do feel like portals should begin as a blank slate, almost like birth.
Right.
Like baby is born with a blank slate, and they are portaled onto this earth, and then they create the components, and their parents create components around their life that form who they become.
I suppose I think what I would say to that is, does a baby ever come in with a blank slate, or do they come in with all of this ancestral baggage that they have to learn to unpack? So then they think they've come in with nothing, and yet when they come into awareness, they've come in with loads, and they're, you know, the route starts to become busier and busier.
I guess talking from a personal standpoint, I always thought I began with a blank slate. But as I got older, I realized that actually I began with a lot of baggage already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which then like you absorb the energy from, or you take the load on, right? Like here.
Uh-huh.
And you learn how to cope with that and deal with that every day.
How did
And
you
what
learn how
becomes
to
of you
unpack?
Tell me what? Sorry.
Sorry, I think we had a bit of a delay there. How did you learn to unpack this said baggage into your space? Like, how do we become comfortable with what is not essentially ours, but was theirs?
So how did I learn to unload that baggage? I would say through collecting, through doing what you love. As I've gotten older and I progressed from like teenager, I've known you for like 7 years now, right?
God, a bit more probably. It's quite
Right.
scary.
Yeah, a bit more. God, maybe it's
I really want to tell the story
wrong.
of how I met Ralph. Can I?
Oh, you want to? Do you want to?
So he's sitting in the corner of a lesson. I won't even say what lesson because
Yeah, please.
we shouldn't go there. But this poor thud is standing at the front trying to get us to do an icebreaker, and I can't remember what it was. He's asking what kind of music everybody likes and stuff. And Russ in the corner goes, "I like Lana Del Rey." And I kid you not, I sit there and I murmur to myself, who is this boy? And lo and behold, he incessantly stalked me and invited me to Pret a Manger every day.
Oh, what an absolute load of bullshit.
Until I became
I think you'll find you invited me to Pret. I think that's. I think we had like dates movies or something, didn't we? Right? Wow.
It's so funny, honestly, but it's interesting how you start to learn about somebody, because I remember I had formed like an impression of Raph that day, and I didn't, you don't quite understand what a person's going to be like until you've seen the full spectrum of them, and even what they
yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead, Raph.
No, I was gonna say, like, I definitely feel like we do stereotype people when we put them in boxes, and that sometimes I feel like we lose the opportunity to get to know people because they say one thing and then we suddenly think we like internalize and we think because of what we see on social media that they must be that exact type of person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the gay community, you have like, you have like a top and a bottom, right? So
I'm not going to comment because someone's going to be like, excuse me, Raph, there are so many variations.
No, I mean, there are so many other
nuances.
But there are so many other nuances. But like on Instagram, people will make jokes about like how a top would text. And it's kind of like generalizing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we do generalize people's art a lot too. Like we generalize artists. And when you're beginning as an artist in a studio, you do generalize people. And you're kind of like, oh, they paint splatters, so they're like a Pollock. They're pretending to be Pollock.
Speaking of, Raph, I just want to jump on that there. Say, for example, your work pays homage to somebody, like you are like thinking about Pollock in the moment where you make your piece of work. Is the spirit of Pollock coming through with you there? Is the notion, like, is the act of thinking about another artist or another person while you're making, bringing their spirit into it?
Yeah.
I just kind
of... That's really interesting. I don't feel that art should be derivative of art ever.
Right. Is it infused or informed in spirit in some way?
I really don't even think it should be infused or informed in spirit. I think that art should be derivative of the music you listen to, the culture you are part of, the way you live, where you live, who you live with, your experiences, your traumas, your poetry, your love, your pain, your craft. I think it should very much be influenced by your craft. I always feel like in art there should be a making element, even if it's the most minute thing, because physicality is where the energy comes from. It's the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into making that object, right? Maybe not blood.
So are the
studio setting.
I'm sorry, let's just put a disclaimer. Raphael was not telling anyone to draw blood. Please don't draw blood. Don't report that.
Anyway. Does not mean that.
Why do we always do this? Anyway, essentially, are these emotions entities then, as opposed to when you see like say for example in Pocahontas, you see like Grandmother Willow, and it's so obvious that she's some kind of entity or some kind of spirit. Are your tears entities? Are your, I guess, your experiences of excitement entities in themselves? Are you experiencing spirit in ways that don't have to be attached to other people in some way?
Definitely. I think experiences are entities for sure. I think like when you shed your skin, like when you have an experience and you shed a new skin, I hear a lot of people say that, where they're like, I've shed a new skin this year, I'm a new person, I've had one of those moments in my life. I feel like we do have those moments in our life where we become a new person based on experience. And that's actually happened to me like 3 times in the last 4 years. Where I've like consistently like quickly changed into a brand new person, but like still kept the customs of the way my grandparents behave.
Did you grieve the person that you were before? Like, did you experience some kind of a death in that process?
A death and a rebirth, yeah. But you feel lighter and you feel, I think you feel 10 times stronger. Like depending on who you are, like I know that I did. I actually used to really struggle to, when you're an artist and you study art, you become engulfed with the idea that your art is to please the curriculum, right? And like only as you start stepping out of that, and I've only started doing that in the last few years, do you realize that your art is really about like you, really. And anything that you have presented in the past has nothing to do with curriculums. As an artist in the studio now, like the work essentially is like about what you want to say and who you want to say it to and why you're saying it. And so like, you know, what was your question again? Sorry, I've gone on a tangent.
I think I lost my question. No, I'm
I
joking. We do this,
Sorry.
like we're too overly familiar that sometimes we drift off and we don't remember what the person asked. But anyway,
Yeah.
for the sake of this chat, we'll circle back to, you know, you're experiencing entities as emotions that are inside you. So is spirit always in you in some way? Like, are you, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you've not got loads of people surrounding you spiritually. Like the sweat is not a person per se, but it's still
No,
an entity.
it's always inside us, always, like without a doubt, like it has to be. Or we wouldn't get up in the morning. It's as simple as.
So if you were to visually look inside your body and tell me what spirit looks like to you, can you see something if you were to imagine it?
That's wow, that's a heavy question.
You can take your close your eyes and think for a moment.
Um,
I was gonna say something there, by the way.
I'm gonna say a phrase that like I thought of the other day that's made me that kind of relates to this in not such an obvious way, but maybe like people can take away from that something. I like for this phrase where it's like we are all spare tires in the back of a moving car. And in a way, like
You like rubber, like you're just cold hard rubber.
no. This has nothing to do with
I'm
it.
joking, Ralph.
No, it's about like the idea that we're all in a moving vehicle, but we're not the main part.
Right.
We do have a spirit. We all have entities. We all have attached entities to us, like Mark Fisher wrote about in his books.
So
Where
what drives
objects
us?
are. Sorry?
What drives this vehicle?
Intimacy.
There we go. Props. Right, okay. Just trying to think about this. So, is there anything else you want to share with us, Raf? How do you want to leave us today?
Yeah, I will be showcasing a performance with the National Gallery coming up soon in late May, which I'm really excited to share with everyone. Yeah, I can't wait to share it with you because it will be the first performance that involves objects and costume all as like one element combined rather than separate entities that are all different pieces. Like I really just wanted to put it all together, almost like make a show, rather than trying to like simplify everything all the time.
Yeah.
I should just, yeah. So I'm really excited to show that. And yeah, I think that's what all I can say is like, you know, I'd love to say some recommendations for zines and books that I think people should read because I think they're great.
Since being
like
that you are a researcher, you're allowed to do that.
yeah. Well, like that's so true. Like a lot of my artwork is research. I write, I research, like I read. I then document the research like all the time. I'd recommend Talker Mag. There's an amazing interview in issue 5 with Joe Fong, who's a choreographer. And then also Worms Mag, which is a new magazine on issue 3, and it's like talking about like literary brilliance among women, which has been like so exciting to read. I do think it's important to absorb pages, right? Because like that's another way of getting energy out of like life is like the pages that we're reading. I want to leave people with that mainly, that I think reading is like the most important thing you can do, not just exercising your brain, but when you have this knowledge, when you're seeing ideas created by other people, you learn to like love a bit more, right? Rather than like be so self-obsessed with yourself. And like I feel like that's definitely something the artist has to step away from, maybe.
I got that. So that has been Raphael talking to us about his perception of spirit and portals. Thank you so much for joining us, Raph.
Thanks for having me, Maz.
Bye.